All right, Paul.
Oh,
Um,
got it.
I know you went to Yale University. That's pretty well documented. But where exactly did you grow up, Paul?
I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. When the
Really?
Yeah, I went to high school, graduated in '75. So I was the beginnings of the whole sort of Prince scene and stuff were swirling around. I think I did a jam session once with Bobby Z. I played bass, so in my high school band, or guitar sometimes. So we'd be at people's houses for jam sessions, and I think he was at one of them in St. Louis Park somewhere. Um, but I didn't know Prince or anything.
I was actually going to ask you about, some of the earliest music that you heard. So the fact that you're out in the Midwest, it could have been anything. I mean, what were you listening to back then?
Deep Purple, uh, Uriah Heep, Grand Funk Railroad was a big one in junior high,
Yeah.
big one, because my parents hated it. My grandmother hated the hell out of that, and so that was great for me. Um, Not particularly Midwest. We were into English stuff, Led Zeppelin. I remember I went to the record store in 10th grade. My family went or something, and I went to the record store and they had a big pile of the new Led Zeppelin record that had Stairway to Heaven on it. So I went home and listened to it, and I was like, wow, that song's pretty cool. And I actually went to school the next day, and I told my friends, like, yeah, the new Zeppelin album's pretty good, man. It's got this really long song. It's got a great guitar solo. It's cool. Like, can you imagine that's just the day that just came out? So
Yeah. So when you were in high
pretty exciting.
school, you must have been a good student or something. I mean, how did you end up going to Yale? Because that's like, pretty good
Yeah, I
school.
was a good student. I mean, it wasn't, um, I'm not one, I didn't disdain school. I mean, my parents wanted me to do well, and I wanted to do well. And, it didn't mean you couldn't like rock and roll. Like, it didn't, I'm from an upper middle class family. So, I wasn't going to be a hoodlum or anything, or like, the sex, like Steve Jones or something.
You
I
said
didn't,
Did you say Minnesota or Minneapolis? Did you grow up in the city or out in the suburbs?
yeah, no, in the city, in a sort of like, not in the downtown of the city, but, you know, um, south of the city a little bit near Lake Harriet,
I just had
which
Lori
is,
Barbero on the show a couple shows
yeah,
ago from Babes in Toyland. They're one of the big band, the replacements, Husker Du. But those came a
oh
little
yeah.
after you left, right?
I was gone by '76. I went to the East Coast, and I never really moved. I never moved back and lived in Minnesota again. I had good friends there, but yeah, I knew Lori a little bit through the friends I had that were still there, and we used to go eat at the restaurant she worked at.
Cool.
And
Now, when you
so
went to Yale, when you went to Yale, did you have what did you major in at Yale?
I really didn't. When I went there, I didn't really have a plan. I started to major in economics, but then I kind of thought that maybe that was kind of crap. Like, everybody had their own theory of economics, and nobody was really right, you know. So it just seemed like, I don't know. And I had some friends who were sort of unabashedly history of art majors. Sean Slade, the guy that I did a lot of
Right.
production with there, and I just ended up meeting a crowd of boho sort of people, believe it or not, like, not really boho, but people who weren't particularly pre-med or anything. And like my friend Jim Fitting, who was also there in my class, and he plays harmonica for Tudor Wright, and
Yeah.
now is in um, he and I were in math class. We took a math class because it was sort of a hangover from high school, where you got to take a class and everything. And so me and him are looking at each other like, what are we doing in this fucking class? And so we went back to his house and smoked big bongs and listened to Little Walter records. And I was like, yeah, that's
That's
much
cool.
better. I learned a lot more. I learned a lot more when I went over to Jim's room and heard Little Walter, because I
Did
didn't
did
really
you
know who was.
did you actually get a degree from Yale?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, to be honest, it turned out that if you embrace it, Yale was a situation where you could really open some doors for yourself. By the end of my 4 years there, I was taking a course. Duke Ellington left all his papers and stuff to Yale for some reason. I'm not sure who engineered that, but so there was this whole Ellington oral history project, and this was, this being like 1978, you could still, a lot of the people that worked with Duke were still alive, and you could just call them up and say, hey, I'm from the Yale Ellington oral history project. I want to come down and interview you. And they'd be like, yeah, sure. So, my friend went and interviewed Max Roach at his house, watched a football game with him, and I interviewed some of the more technical people like Frank Driggs, who was a producer. He was the guy who pulled all the Robert Johnson masters together into those records that most people have, King of the Delta Blues Singers, Volume 1 and 2. Just interesting people. T.L. Macero, the guy who produced Bitches Brew, but also produced a lot of Ellington stuff. You could just name, John Hammond, the famous engineer, guy. I just called him up and he said, yeah, come on down. So it would open doors for you being from there. And people took you more seriously. And I was also in a class about the origins of rock and roll taught by Robert Palmer, who was the writer, not the singer.
Rolling Stone writer. Yeah.
Yeah. He had amazing stuff. He had guys in Africa playing gourds with strings on them and sounding just like Chuck Berry. Like it was so obvious, the parallels, you couldn't miss it. He's like, here's where rock and roll came from. Boom. And he's a nice guy. And I also took a course from David Geffen, who
you did
he had a couple of years off from his doctors told him he had cancer and he was going to die. And they said, you better get your stuff together. So he quit all his jobs and sold it all, whatever, and got ready to go. And then the doctor said, well, we made a mistake. You're fine. So he had this kind of bizarre new lease on life. And he was just trying to decide what to do. And he must have been hanging out with somebody in New York. And they said, well, why don't you come and teach a seminar at Yale? You can, and that appealed to him. So he came and taught a seminar, and it was hard to get in. You had to interview to get in.
Wow. You mentioned you played bass in high school. Did you play with any bands or do anything like that while you were in school?
Oh yeah. I mean, we did it for fun. We were at college, so we weren't really trying to make it as a band, but we had fun doing it. Kind of punk rock, this was, 78, 77, 78, 79. So we were literally going down to the record store and buying the latest Clash single, and being inspired by that. So that's the kind of music that we wanted to do, and just have fun and be loud and, break instruments and stuff, so we didn't really get serious about making records until after that. We did recordings. I think there might be a few recordings out there, but we didn't do anything that was released.
Was that with Sean also?
Yeah.
And Jim?
Yeah, everybody chimed in. It was kind of loose. We had some, one night we played at the opening of a film festival, and we just played a couple of really fast Kinks tunes. And there, I don't know who was in that band. Maybe there's like 8 people on stage or something. We were just doing it to have fun. And it wasn't until after college that things got more serious on the musical career front, I guess.
Yeah. What made you guys move to Boston? Was that a plan all along, or?
No. Sean graduated a year early, and he moved up to Boston. I'm not in Boston now. He moved up to Boston because he had friends there, and he could kind of move into their apartment cheap. And Boston in 78, 9 was run down, but it wasn't as bad as New York. That was the toughest time of New York, and New York just didn't seem very attractive to us, even though we were in New Haven and there was a lot more connection to New York.
Yeah.
New York seemed just too hard. Boston was a lot easier. There were more clubs. You could get an apartment, more jobs. It just seemed like a easier place to go. And we didn't have any particular connection to New York. So we all sort of drifted up there one at a time. I went out to California for a while and lived with some friends and played in a band out there. And, ended up.
Was that LA?
Back.
Los Angeles?
No, I lived up in Northern California above San Francisco, like in Guerneville, Casadero, kind of Russian River,
Right,
probably all
right.
flooded right now.
Wow, yeah.
It was beautiful. We just had this weird, this guy had to leave the country very suddenly. And he got us to, he basically said, you can just live in my house. I'm going to be gone, but just live in the house, you know? And so it was kind of a weird hippie situation. Everybody was growing weed in their backyard, you know,
Were you
collecting
there for a long
welfare.
time? How long were you in California for?
9 months, maybe,
Right.
not a year,
Um,
you know? We didn't have, we weren't able to really get anything going out there with the guys I was with out there. Jim was from California and we moved out there. So they had more going on. The guys that moved up to Boston had more going on. So I moved up there.
I was a really big fan of the Sex Execs, a band that
Really?
you played in. In fact, I
Yeah.
interviewed Walter and Ted when I was doing the local music show at WDJM out in Framingham. I actually even remember they had a woman with them named Claire. I don't know if she was the manager or not, but when I saw the photos that we took from back then, I saw Claire in the photo, and I remembered her name. Um,
She was
you,
our sound person,
oh, she
our
was just,
sound engineer,
oh, cool.
and a friend of the band.
Yeah, I,
But she was our secret weapon. I was telling someone when we got to a gig, you know, it was our way to diffuse the usual sound man bullshit that you or
hello?
whatever, you know.
Oh, I lost
Claire
you
would be
for
like, "Can we get some mics?" And then, oh, I have some at my house. I'll go get them. You know. So it was very good plan. It helped us out a lot. You know.
Uh, how did
Um,
tell us about how that the Sex Execs formed and how that all came together? Because you guys were a good band. I saw many of your shows. I remember Walter looked like he should have been in the NBA. He was like 6'6" or something like that.
oh yeah.
You
Well,
guys
we
wore suits, and
did. It was, you know, this was in the early 80s now, you know, 80, 82, 83, 84. And yeah, it was just we just you could find old clothes cheap. You know, people were really cheap. Like you could go to that place, $1 a pound, you know, and you'd fill a bag and they just weigh it. If it weighed 10 pounds, it weighed $10, you know. And you could get amazing old suits and ties, and you know, so we kind of competed during the week to see what we could find, and then when we got to like play a gig on Friday night or something, we'd whip out our latest, like, look at this. And so that friendly competition is always a good creative thing. We were just, you know, we had a nucleus of guys in the house and we started playing and we were kind of on the scene, and we weren't called the Sex Execs until we sort of all got together. But you know, everybody just sort of brought something to it, and we wrote our own songs, and you know, we ended up turning into kind of a party band where, you know, we'd play these college dances or cruises or something where, you know, it was a party thing, and we'd play long versions of funky songs like you know, Get Down Tonight or
yeah.
Disco Inferno or something like that, you know. It's just to kind of keep the party going. So we got to be pretty good at that. I don't know. I mean, you know, it was fun. And one reason it was fun was that we were kind of outside. We did everything ourselves. We had an agent, but we kind of did everything outside. Like we never got involved with the music business. We didn't get signed and dropped. We made our own records. You know, there wasn't really, we didn't end up getting into the machine as much as I later began to understand how that works, you know,
Yeah.
how that works. It doesn't really work that way anymore. But, you know, we didn't get our hearts broken like that. You know, we just kind of did what we did, and we played a lot of gigs. We had fun. 83 was a fun year. We probably played 100 gigs, and you know, we were a full-time rock and roll band, and we were good, and we were also kind of drunk, and you know, just young guys having fun. It's it's really a young man's game, and we had fun doing it. And I'm not unhappy that we didn't get any farther with it, because from what I know, you know, now we probably would have just ended up bitter. So, you know,
Where you said you guys
then,
you said you guys all lived in a house. Where was the house located?
Dorchester.
Dorchester.
It was dirt cheap. It was $650 a month for the whole house. and
Wow.
like 10 people live there, some 8 or 10 people live there various times, and various, it was a big old Victorian house, not in the best shape, but who cares, and it was the kind of thing where, we'd all come back everybody come back to the house after a show, and we all stay up late talking and drinking beer and just being generally convivial. It was a scene. It was fun, and there weren't other bands that lived near us, but there were some like-minded individuals, and Dorchester was kind of a little bit of a scene. We got some of the people from Human Sexual Response lived out there. There's a really nice area of Dorchester, south of Fields Corner, where the houses are big, beautiful houses that used to be country houses for the people that lived on Beacon Street, and so they go down to Dorchester, for the summer to live in their other big mansion down there. So there's lots of nice houses down there. Melville Avenue.
I read that you guys started like you and Sean, I guess, or maybe someone else too, started like setting up equipment and started recording. I think you only had like a 4-track or something. And I had read that maybe Three Colors, Dana Colley's band, was that the first band that you recorded?
One of them, the first one was probably Lifeboat, Gary Smith's band.
Oh yeah,
Who ended up
Lifeboat.
being, Gary ended up being a big fixture in the whole Fort Apache thing. So, but yeah, that's kind of how we got to know him and them. And yeah, we just set up a studio in our house. We played in the basement, and we ran a snake up to the attic, and that provided enough isolation to be able to go up there and have it be a control room. And it was crude, but we taught ourselves how to do it, making demos and recordings. We had no eye on being commercial about it, but then we ended up really, one of the first things I got paid to do was a commercial. One of the guys in the band worked at a radio station, and they were trying to get a song for an ad, and we made one up and we sold it and played on Celtics games, So very early on, we had some good feedback about, you could do this. You don't have, just do it. Don't worry that you're not a fancy studio or you don't have this or that piece of equipment. Just do it,
And I know that the first location for Fort Apache was over in Roxbury. I don't know where, but I hear it wasn't a very nice neighborhood. How did that whole process come together around 86 where that all came together for you?
Yeah. Well, we had that home studio, and another friend of ours, Joe Harvard, he had a home studio too. And we kind of said, you know what, why don't we join forces and start a studio? I'm not exactly sure why we decided to do that, but it just seemed like we wanted to do something more. We both had studios in our houses, and it was becoming a little bit, I guess we had to move out of that house, so we didn't have that anymore. So anyway, we were just looking for cheap space, and we found this guy who had this enormous building that had been a commercial laundry, huge building, like half a city block. And he bought the whole thing at an auction or bankruptcy or something. And so he just needed to rent it. He wasn't picky about tenants. He was like, if you'll move down here. I mean, it wasn't the worst area. It was kind of desolate. It was more desolate than dangerous. It wasn't like there were a lot of guys hanging out in the corner who would come over and mess with you. It was just more that it was tumbleweeds tumbling down the street, like
Really?
no help. Yeah, it's across the park from the Liberty Diner. If you go, that part of Mass Ave that goes through, goes across by Con Ed is there, and the Venetian, I don't know if that's still there, where the Boston Globe guys used to drink. And then the Liberty Diner was open 24 hours. And there's a park across the street from that. And if you went through the park, you'd hit that's where our building was. So
how did you guys come up with the name how did you guys come up with the name Fort Apache? Because I thought that was because of the neighborhood.
Well, yeah. No, I'm not saying bad things didn't happen. We used to get stuff stolen all the time. We got cars stolen and batteries stolen out of cars. I made the mistake of leaving half a bottle of wine in my back seat one day, and somebody busted the window and got, there was constant crime, but it didn't. I mean, we weren't going to let that stop us. But one day, one of the days we were building the inside, a friend of ours who's a carpenter, and Bill Conway, who played drums as well.
Oh, Billy Conway,
He left his drums in his truck and he parked outside, and we were working on the studio, and then we came out to go to dinner, and his truck got broken into and they stole most of his drums, and it was a mess. And somebody, I forget who, but somebody said, Jesus Christ, it's like fucking Fort Apache around here. Meaning Fort Apache, the Bronx, you know? But we all looked at each other like, because we were trying to think of a name and we hadn't really thought of a very good one yet. And that one just instantly stuck, and that became it, you know? It's just luck, good luck in a way that just happened out that way.
Was it at that point where was it you and Sean and Joe at that point?
And Jim and not Gary yet. There's probably 4 or 5 of us. Lou Giordano was kind of in on it. He was
Lou,
guy
right.
at Radio, and he was looking for a place. It was kind of when we formed Fort Apache, it was an interesting concept, because we had this idea that instead of having a rock band, we were all producers and engineers, so we would have a studio that was kind of like a band, you know?
That's cool.
Like we would be dedicated to rock and roll, and we would not be fancy, but we would have good stuff, and we knew how to use it. And a scene always needs points to coalesce around, you know? Like the Boston scene at that point, you know, there was the Middle East came on the scene around that time, like 86, 87, started doing shows because Joe started doing shows there. And, you know, you need clubs, you need an audience of people who want to go out and see music, and you need a recording studio or two to produce songs that the scene could coalesce around, you know. And before we got going, Rick Hart was doing that. He did Academy Fight, Commissioner Burma, and Prettiest Girl for the did he do the Neighborhoods?
Yeah, Neighborhoods. Yes, he did. Yes.
So I mean, he was doing these really like important singles that everybody was listening to and paying attention to, and you know, so we were inspired by him for sure. That, you know, we could be a place where bands would go and not feel intimidated and be able to get a good track that sounded good, sounded like rocky, and you know, and at that time, I mean, you didn't even have to press your song into a single. You know, you could just make a tape and take it to BCN and FNX, and you could take it to the radio station, and they would, if they really liked it. I mean, BCN took the Cars, just what I needed, a tape, and just put it into rotation and played it on the, you know, the cart machine, played it like a song, and it pretty soon, you know, kaplawi. So, you know, a lot of stuff we did would get played on the Sunday shows or the morning shows on MBR, Late Risers Club, you know. So there's competition, like I said, friendly competition. Everybody was trying to get on that, into the, you know, trying to get the DJs to play your song. Like,
was this still happening at the original Fort Apache, or did this start happening more when you moved to Cambridge?
No, the Cambridge move didn't come until we did the Throwing Muses demos, and then we did the Pixies' first thing, Come On Pilgrim, the purple tape. Gary, that was when Gary kind of entered the scene, and we had bumped up to, like, by the time of the Pixies record, which was 87, we had a 16 track, a 1-inch 16 track, which was a little more professional. But then we got the job doing the Throwing Muses album that would become called House Tornado.
Yeah.
And we kind of didn't want to do it. We wanted to do it at a better studio, but there wasn't one that we wanted to go to really. And so we kind of made it happen to get that other one, you know. Joe was able to get his parents to put a second mortgage on their house, and we bought it from this guy who was kind of on his way out of the business, you know. And so we got that studio running in order to do that Muses record, you know. And then you know, and we kind of went on from there. But I think that, you know, the idea is we didn't completely outgrow the other space, but there were some limitations there that, you know, we wanted to get beyond.
There were a bunch of early bands that you guys recorded, like, that ended up on Tang and Homestead and labels like that. Yeah. Were those coming from the labels, or were you doing the bands first and then they were going to the labels?
Well, that's a good question. At that point, there were independent labels in and around Boston and New York that were looking for bands, found bands, and provided modest budgets for the bands to record.
Right.
So like the Oilers were on Tang. I don't know where that money came from. It may have been their money or it may have been Curtis's money. But the Boss Tones were on Tang. The people were on Matador, or
you're thinking of like Volcano Sons and Big Dipper. Yeah.
Big Dipper on Homestead, Volcano Sons were on Homestead. Those were where a band would have a modest budget, like $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000, Dinosaur came along and they had a bit more money from SST, but it wasn't until they got onto Warner's that as those bands went up the ladder, the budgets got bigger. We didn't intend to. The studio was always we were trying to make it cheap, so bands could afford to do it. And if a band's got a few $1,000 from Homestead or something, that was basically it was not a big deal,
Right.
And so, we were used to working with that kind of budgets, and that's kind of what we're back to now, I'd say. Most bands have about that much money to do a record, and they pay for it themselves, unfortunately. But
I was going to ask you this question a little later, but I'm going to ask you now. There's a lot of bands that you guys have worked with that kept coming back, which is pretty complimentary to you guys. Yeah. And, they kept working with you. Do you think that you developed these kind of relationships early on and these bands just trusted you guys and they're like, well, we want to go to those guys again and work with them?
Well, we had good word of mouth. People would ask, like, where should I go? Or, because it got around that we're not going to tell you to turn down, that kind of thing. That was Jay Mascis's thing. He didn't want to turn down. He didn't want to have some engineer go, it's a little loud, man. I don't know. It's kind of distorting, and it was that's the same thing that, happened with Eric Clapton and Cream, back when they did the John Mayall or, Cream records, they worked with people who didn't tell them to turn down. So, there's that. I mean, we tried to have fun with it, we tried to have fun and make records that were fun and that people had fun making them, and be nice to people. And there was part of a whole scene. I mean, everyone kind of knew everyone else in some way, so Pixies and Throwing Muses finished their records and then went on tour in England together, and came back, and it was if it's time for a new record, your friends want to make it with their friends. And I'm not going to say that we were so amazingly awesome. We didn't really have the best gear until later. At some point we did end up having world-class gear, but it was more the vibe of the studio and the people and the friendship.
It's impossible for me to talk about all the stuff you've done because you've done so much, but I did want to talk about a couple of different records here. The first one I'm going to mention might be a little bit of a surprise to you because it's not exactly considered the band's best record, but I love the record, and that's the Lemonheads Lovey record. I mean, I thought that record was brilliant, and you guys made it, and it's a real guitar rock record. What was it like working with those guys?
Well, we were talking earlier about the record company situation, and so here's a case where the Lemonheads had a successful record on Tang, Hate Your Friends, is that it? Or
yeah,
the one, and then they did the they were just a hot band. They got signed to Atlantic on the strength of being a hot band, but they didn't have very much material. I just remember as a producer, the biggest problem I had with that record was that there just weren't a lot of songs around. And that's why there ended up being like brass buttons,
covers.
One night we were in the studio and things just weren't happening and it wasn't very exciting. And I said, I was trying to get things happening. And I said, well, what would you like to do? And Evan said, I want to record a Graham Parsons song. So we just did it all in one night. Boom, soup to nuts. And it's good. It's one of the better things on the record because he put his heart into it. And when Evan has so much talent, and at that point, he could just walk up to a mic and sing a vocal from one take, and it would be jaw-droppingly good when he meant it. So that was a good example of that. So really, it was about trying to find those moments, because there were a lot of distractions for them at that point. They weren't very cohesive as a group, and there were a lot of different agendas and different people influencing them. And so it was a difficult record, and we had to just try to make something that was commercial. But even so, it wasn't a hit. It sold maybe 30,000 copies.
Yeah,
it
wasn't.
I mean,
like I said, it wasn't
okay.
one of their more popular records, but I really liked it. The guitar sound was fantastic on that record.
Well, I did it with Lou. Lou was the engineer, and we worked on some mixed it in a fancy studio in Connecticut, and I mean, it was a step up for us. And yeah, I think we did a good job on it. I just think it wasn't. And you notice that after that, Evan went to Australia and found some inspiration with a friend he met there to write. He found a guy he could write with, and then you got Shame About Ray, which was much better material on the whole. I mean, that's the thing with a band. You kind of get what you get. You get them at a certain moment when there's certain people in the band, certain people coming in, certain people coming out. Who's doing the writing? How good is it? I mean, so that was an example where I got him a little on the early side, and I didn't really have the goods to hit it out. It was a tough pitch to hit. And maybe we hit it for a single.
Well,
but sometimes you just get a fastball right down the middle, and you got to hit those out. And if you do, then you look good.
I think we're going to talk about a fastball right now. We're going to talk about Hole, because that's a different situation, because you ended up working with a band that had their biggest record live through this. We
got them at the right time, because the first record was a big mess, produced by Kim Gordon, the Pretty on the Inside. Good record in its way, but not really commercial. But then then in between there, she got involved with Kurt Cobain, and then Nirvana became the biggest band in the world. And so the gauntlet was thrown down. She had to do something that was big. She couldn't just do a little record. She had to do a big record, And so her ambition was very high, and we were ready to do it. And we had the backing. The label was ready to back them. And, that was one of those things that you're exactly right. That was like, when I heard the demos for that record, I couldn't believe it. I was like, the doll parts and stuff like that. I was like, man, I got to do this. So you just knew that it was, it was coming right down the middle.
Was Mark Cates the A&R person for Hole at that time?
Yep.
Did he have anything to do with them coming to Boston to record?
They did not come to Boston to record.
Where did you do that? I'm sorry?
We did it in Atlanta.
Oh,
we did it in Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because Siamese, the Smashing Pumpkins had just recorded there at this place in Atlanta. And Courtney knew Billy, and Billy said, you should go there. And we had no objections, because we didn't really want to do it at our home studio. And they had good gear there. It turned out it was a wild studio. Crazy. The owner was the guy who kind of put Jägermeister on the map in the United States. So they were dedicated partiers. Like, we'd get done around midnight, and they would just be getting going, and they'd go all night, drink. If we left any beer or anything, they'd always drink it all, and then they'd send the guy in the morning to replace it. It was wild. But yeah, Kate's it was more like I got a call one day from a woman who managed Butch Vig, and she sort of enigmatically, she said, "You don't know me, but I just did you a favor." And I said, "Well, thanks. What you want to tell me what it is?" And she said, "No, you'll know." So then we found out a week or so later that Kurt and Courtney had been meeting with Butch Vig, you know, because obviously they wanted Butch Vig to do Courtney's record because he did a good job on Kurt's record. And Butch said, "No, I can't do it. You know, I want to start my own thing," which was Garbage, which that he started his own band, you know, and he just didn't want to do it, you know. And they said, "Well, who would you get to do it?" And he said, "Why don't you get those guys that did Creep?" And Kurt said, "I like that song. Yeah, yeah." So, and Mark was in that meeting, and he goes, "Well, I know those guys. They're friends of mine. We'll get a call. You know, we'll do a call." So, you know, we had a call with Courtney, and I think we had a lot of things in common. We had her lawyer with my lawyer. You know, there were a lot of ways that it just sort of came together. You could see it happening, you know. But Case was instrumental. Yeah, if he hadn't been at that meeting right then to say, "Oh, I know those guys," you know, that was what tipped it over toward us, I think, at that moment. And then, you know, we had to talk our way. We had to talk about it and all that. But
you mentioned Radiohead, and I was going to ask you about Radiohead. That, you know, you ended up doing their biggest song pretty much. And how did that come together?
It is their biggest song.
Yeah.
It's currently being streamed about 850,000 times a day.
Wow.
Which is nuts. It's 30 years old. It just had its 30th anniversary. And I mean, some days it does a million a day. That means like 40 people a second hit the button to hear the Creep, which is crazy. You know, I mean, how did we do it? It came up as one of the songs on their first record. We didn't get a demo of it. They didn't make a demo of it. They wrote it, and they weren't sure what to do with it. And you know, when we heard it, we thought, Sean and I thought we'd better find a way to record this. And even though we were being paid to do some other songs for them, we kind of snuck that one in there. And
really,
and then the radios. Yeah, we were being paid, you know, to do a couple songs, just kind of as a test run, you know, like see if you get along, that kind of thing. And the 2 songs they assigned us were not by any means their best songs at all. They've never been on a record, and they were quickly dropped. But so we were trying to record these songs that weren't very good, and we weren't having a very good time doing it. So I suggested that we would do that one, and they only played it once. There's only one take of it. So,
real one take? Wow. Well, did you do that? Where did you record that? You didn't record that in New England, did you?
No, in England.
England.
In Oxford, in a studio called Chipping Norton that was in Chipping Norton, England, which is a kind of a retirement there's a lot of old pensioners who moved to Chipping Norton. This studio was built in an old boys' school. And it was kind of a famous studio. They did you know that song Baker Street by Jerry Rafferty?
Yeah, with the saxophone solo, yeah.
Saxophone, yeah. That was done there. A bunch of 80s stuff. They had gold records on the wall. It was kind of a fancy studio. They had a cook who made us dinner every night, you know. But yeah, we were in the studio trying to figure out what to do, and I just threw it out there. I was like, "Hey, do that other song," and they did it, and everybody that was in the studio just kind of like stopped at the end of it, and we didn't really know what to do. And so Sean said something like, "Let's go have lunch." So they went and had lunch, and I edited it some, and then when they came back, we decided that maybe we would work on it. And I called the A&R guy and had him come up and listen to it, and he said, "Well, okay, you can finish it. It's all right, it's good." And I said, "Okay," and we did. And then when we left it, at that point, it still had the "You're so fucking special" lyric in it, which is the real lyric. But they called us. That was an early, like maybe late February, early March of '83, maybe. And so we went back home, and then we went to South by Southwest, and I remember getting a call
I
down in
think you meant
Austin.
93, right?
Oh yeah, 93.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Here's all blur. 93, yeah, and I went to South by Southwest and I got a call saying we want you to come back to England and the BBC won't play the song unless you get rid of the fuck. So we had to, we recorded the other line and then I literally wasn't automated. I had to be like, you so da da da. You had to move the faders like so that word came up. And but I remember thinking we actually got a little bit better mix of the clean one because they were all manual mixes, and so that people just had a strong reaction to that song, and A&R guys at the time they would do a lot of times they would do a thing where they would go in their office, leave the door open, and play something real loud, like some new demo or something for a band they thought what they liked or something, and see if people ran in and was like, who's that? Wow. Or if they pointedly did not, like, what was that? And I didn't like it, whatever, like to get it's like to do a little test. And, so this guy went back and played it. And sure enough, people came running in going, what the fuck was that? So they just, from the start, they got a good reaction to it. So
I was in a lot of those offices that did stuff like that. So I know exactly what you're talking about, man. I just want to ask you about a couple more artists here. Well, Morphine, I have to mention because you did a lot of work with Morphine, and plus you mentioned Billy Conway before, who was I think the second drummer of Morphine,
right.
And plus you'd known Dana for a long time, so that must have been a band that you really enjoyed working with.
It didn't even. I mean, that's an example of what I was talking about before. We were all friends, Dana, I knew him from Three Colors. I went to England and lived with him for months over there. Like we were really good friends. Jim, Conway, I went to college with, and played in bands after college, and we were really good friends. Sandman, same thing. Like I used to do sound for Treat Her Right and go on the road with them. I mean, I knew all those guys for years, and it was just never a question of like who's gonna do this record or something. It was all this community of people that made, we'd go and make a record or do recordings. We never allowed to, until they got signed to Ryko, it wasn't really a distinct, we're making this record now. Like the beginnings of Cure for Pain were just a session that we did between Christmas and New Year's in like 93 probably. And it just, I was working on those songs, like Buena was one of them, and my girlfriend at the time heard it. She worked for Rykodisc, and she said, "This is good. Do you mind if I play it for my boss?" And so she took it and she did the same thing. She played it at her desk, and the head of the company came over and said, "What the fuck is that?" So it was a group of friends really that really were close, and we hung out all the time. We didn't just barely know each other. Like we had all known each other for like at least 10 years. So, it was a very natural thing. It was just this big swirling scene where people played, people played on this thing and that thing and come over and play on my record. And, it was very loose and, which was good. It was a great scene. It was great. Early 90s in Boston, man. Fun.
Yeah, you were in the middle of a lot of good stuff.
There's a lot of opportunity in the air.
I just got to ask you about this guy because the fact that you worked with him blew my mind. Warren Zevon.
Oh yeah. Well, he liked Radiohead, and he may have approached Nigel Godrich. I'm not sure, and got turned down. But somebody put out a feeler to our management, and we jumped on it. Sean and I loved Warren Zevon. Sean actually probably introduced me to him, his first album, and I never honestly thought that I would get a chance to work with him, but same thing. Like he had some demos that were great, and he did them himself, and they were kind of stiff. But we said, look, we think your demos are great. We just want to kind of work inside them and sort of build them up and make them better, and you don't have to start from scratch. And he liked that idea because he didn't like starting from scratch. I'm sure he must have asked his people, who do they work with? And they said Radiohead, and he's like, stop right there. I love Radiohead. So, he was a big fan of the Bends, and he was a very DIY guy. Like he traveled, by himself. He didn't have a band. So he kind of needed producers to put that around him. And then he had previously done that in Los Angeles with all the Waddy Wachtel kind of guys, the LA session guys. But I think he liked our approach was a little more organic. Some of the people we brought in, he loved. Some of the people he didn't love. But, it was a wild record. He's an interesting guy. And I think he was kind of starting to be sick at that point. But, we didn't really ever talk about it. He had bad headaches, really always constant bad headaches. Like there was one day when he was in a really good mood, and I said, "Man, you're in a really good mood today." He goes, "Well, it's the first day I don't have a headache."
Wow.
So, I don't know what caused those. I don't think he didn't have brain cancer. I'm not sure. I think it was those were just migraines. But yeah, he drank Diet Mountain Dew all day, like chugged it. And we literally had to go in wider and wider circles every day to find Diet Mountain Dew for the studio, because he would go through 10 or 20 bottles of it, because he would just open one and then take that first supercharged hit, and then that would be it for that one. So, it was kind of a little bit of a running joke. Like the assistants at the studio had to go out and find Diet Mountain Dew. It's not always the easiest thing to find. One of those things. But we didn't try to remain friends or anything. Like he was pretty tough on us, and it wasn't always super fun. But at the end of the record, he shook my hand and he looked me in the eye and he said, "We had some laughs." And I said, "Yeah, we did." And,
You seem like you had good relationships with a lot of people that you worked with. Was there ever anyone that made you miserable that you didn't want to work with? I mean, you don't have to answer the question if you don't want, but you can if you want.
Oh, Rick Ocasek.
Really?
Absolutely. He was trying to make a solo record, and he asked a bunch of the people that he worked with, that he had produced, like Melissa from Hole and people from Bad Religion and Nada Surf and stuff. He asked them, like, who should I get? And me and Sean were really hot producers at the time, and they must have said, you should get these guys. But he was very competitive, like he didn't want us to win. He didn't want us to be right about things. It was a very difficult project, and we ended up kind of quitting it. Maybe we got fired or maybe we quit. I'm not sure, but whatever. It didn't. We did some work on the record that eventually came out, but it was very, it was one of my least favorite projects that I worked on. So,
well, thanks for answering that question.
We didn't have fights or anything. He was a very passive aggressive guy. Like he would never fight with you. He would just walk away and not talk to you. That kind of thing. Like he was very passive aggressive. But I will say his wife, Paulina, was charming, very friendly, and one of the nicest people I've ever met, and one of the most beautiful. So unclear what was going on there, but weird. That was a weird project. One of those ones where you.
I noticed you mentioned before, and it's a fact too, that the budgets have gone down a lot over the years. Has that made you less pickier over who you would work with as the years have gone along?
Oh no, it's made me more picky. It's the exact reverse. Because if someone's offering to pay you $100,000 to do a record, well, you might be like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. But if someone's offering you to pay me $1,000, I'm not going to do it unless I love them. It's not. I mean, I've been really lucky in some of the opportunities that I've had to work with people, and I'm not gonna. I wouldn't say any different, but you see what I'm saying? Like, it's a lot easier to have your standards lowered if they're paying big money, and that's a trap that you fall into, because as you go up the ladder, you start getting bigger and bigger offers, it just kind of makes more problems in a way, because people want more. They want more out of you. They want more, it's just, it becomes a little confusing. And you end up working with bands that you probably shouldn't be working with just because they're paying you money. So, in the beginning, when a lot of the bands we worked with, it wasn't that we were being picky, we just liked what we liked, and we naturally gravitated toward what we liked. And we didn't always get the job working with bands that we tried to get a job with. I mean, notably, like, I was really trying to get the Soul Asylum job to make Grave Dancers Union. And because it was another one of those things, I heard the demos and they were astounding. And the record was going to be monstrous. And I really tried to get that record, but it went to Michael Beinhorn, and he did a great job. But some of you don't get them all, So you try to go at it. But in the early days of Fort Apache, I will say that we were very proactive. Like, Gary and I went to the Rat, and we went to the Pixies gig, and we went up to him after the show, and he said, "Come to my studio. I want to make a record with you. You guys are great. I mean, we're not going to stop till you guys are famous," and they're like, "Okay." So, we went after bands we liked, for sure. And that's one reason that we had, why we had a studio, because we were like, we can do it. You need to make a record, so let us do it. I mean, who else were they going to get?
Just a couple more things. You're up in New York now, upstate New York.
Yeah, near Albany.
And are you really active these days as far as projects go?
Well, I do a lot of mixing, and I have done. I am active. I trying to. I don't work for labels much anymore. I work for bands. Like today, I'm doing a bunch of, like, here's what I'm working on now. I'm working on a reissue record. You remember the band La Peste?
Oh yeah, of course.
Ben, Peter Dayton, and so this label is doing. They've dug up a lot of the demo tapes. They never made a record. They did one single, Better Off Dead, and they did a couple other studio sessions. One with Rick Ocasek, and they did a bunch of demos and stuff. So he's gathered up all the tapes he can find of them, and we're working on a kind of a box set. And I've been kind of working with the material to try and get it to sound as good as possible, because some of it was just like on cassettes and stuff. So that's going to be out this year, I hope.
I hope Spy Master is in that list of songs.
Yeah, there's a good demo of that. That's one of the better things. A lot of the stuff that was on their record was the live set from the Rumble,
right?
ACN. So he's not going to put any of those live things on this record, but there'll be another live thing after this, I think. But yeah, I had a good interview with Peter, and it's great because the Sex Execs used to open for Peter Dayton a lot when he got rid of La Peste and he had his new wave band, the Peter Dayton Band.
I remember that.
So we used to open for him a lot, and he was a nice guy. He was good to us. He was helpful, always helpful. So I'm working on that. I'm working on Joe Gittleman from the Boss Tones. The Boss Tones broke up, but Gittleman's still writing stuff. So we're working on a bunch of projects. One is sort of a solo record for him. Another one is a band for that ska band, the Pie Tasters. I'm working with a guy named Johnny Irion, who lives in the Berkshires. Used to be married to Sarah Lee Guthrie. He's got a couple good projects going on. I'm doing a whole deep dive into the Morphine catalog, because that catalog was a little unexploited for a while. It was a little underexploited for a while, and we're going back to the master tapes and transferring them and making new not mixes, but instrumental mixes and stuff to put in commercials. And so a good part of what I do is archival, based on it's going back to some of the things that I did in the past. But I'm still working with new bands, and still working with people that I've known for years, mixing a record for Dinty Childs from Session, who does solo records every couple of years, and it's great record. So I'm lucky to work on good music. I worked on the Jayhawks last record quite a bit. It's I did the biggest sort of new band I work with is a band called Pretty Sick, who are a woman lives in London and New York, and they're kind of a grunge, modern, weird pop band, and really good. She writes great songs.
It sounds
She's
like
a
you're
big Hole
busy,
fan.
man. It sounds like
Well,
you're pretty
amazingly
busy.
so, you'd be surprised. A lot of these guys that you'd think like, oh, what does he do anymore? When you talk to them, they're actually pretty busy. It's just that it's so hard for a record to make an impact, or to make an impact as a producer, it's so hard for a record to make an impact anymore. I mean, people live in silos, bands exist in silos, and a band can, like I mixed a band for a friend of mine, Lyle Brewer's band, Neighbor, and they're sort of up and coming jam band, and they're in this world of jam bands that a lot of people don't look into. They don't go into that building, but they're up on about the 9th floor of that building working, they're out there, they're opening for bigger bands, and they've got a following and people are into it. And, their new record, I'm sure will, they'll sell it to their fans, and it's a project that will probably do well and make money. And they, it's, they're doing really well as a band. But yet a lot of people have never heard of them, and a lot of people never will. It's just, it's really hard to be the Beatles nowadays, and hard to be a culture, hard to do anything that's culturally big. And it's hard to make an impact as a producer, unless you're doing the kind of thing like the guys in Sweden do, where they write the songs and they produce the songs, and like the people that produce Taylor Swift or whatever, or Kesha, or something like that. So I feel like there's a lot of people that, if you're a pro, I've been doing it a long time. I'm a professional musical recorder, and there's jobs out there. There's jobs to be had, but it's not the gold rush. At one point, there was just a crazy gold rush of craziness, and those things come and go. So it's like anything. It's like a band. You're going to have that moment where you put it all together, and you got the right music at the right time. The Bosstones would be a good example. They spent 10 years touring, building up a following, and then ska music sort of got to be a big deal, and they were in the right place with the right time with that Let's Face It record, and they sold like 5 million of that record.
Yeah.
Because they were just in the right place at the right time. They had the goods, they had the team behind them, they were on a great label that had a really good radio department and a promotion department, and they were gonna we're gonna make this song big, and that's just an example of something where everything was just firing on all cylinders, and everybody was in the right place. Like, same thing with sports teams. You don't win the Super Bowl just because one guy is good. You win the Super Bowl because everyone on your team is awesome. Like every lineman, the receivers, the coaches, everybody is good. So if you can be on a team like that, and that's making a record is like a team like that. And so if you're on a team where everyone, is doing a great job in their position, you got a chance to win the Super Bowl. But it's hard to win the Super Bowl, and it's harder than ever.
You've been on some pretty good teams, Paul.
Absolutely, and that's something that you understand. Like, you got to know what your job is. It's like being a producer is like being the director of a movie. You don't necessarily shoot the movie. That's the engineer's job. You're not the actor, so that's a whole different other job. And you're probably not the writer of the songs or anything, but you're the guy that has to make it come in on budget, on time, get it done, get the right shots, get them edited right, make sure there's some cohesiveness there. I mean, it's a fun job, and you can really make a big difference to a project. A band can have great songs, but if they don't have a good producer, it's really hard for them to make a great record. Somebody has to know what they're doing, and unfortunately, you've seen, there's been instances where that's happened, and great songs will always be great, but Big Star might be a good example, where they had John Fry at Ardent, just a magician, and he made them sound like it's like they're the best power pop band that ever was, but that's a lot of that's due to him. I mean, Alex didn't have a very good work ethic, and so getting him to do stuff could be an issue, you know. And so it's like he was able to get, it's kind of like what I was talking about with Evan, you know, like you got to recognize when the moment is right, and you got to strike, and then you got to figure out how to go on over some rough patches, and you know, so there's a little bit of psychology involved, there's a little bit of technology involved, you know. You gotta make it look easy, you know, like you can't the band's not going to have sympathy for you about how your job is so tough. You know, like you gotta command their respect, but you know, it's really, and every situation is different too. Like it's like you know, if I use the football team analogy, you know, like if you're playing against one team, you got to play a certain way, but if you're playing, there's other teams that you wouldn't play them the same way, you know. So you got to kind of figure out what's going on. Who's the weak link here? Who's the strongest link? You know, who's going to lose it? Who's going to keep it together? You know, it's that's what makes it so fun and so fascinating. So
thanks a lot, Paul. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, man.
Sure. Yeah.
Very good.
I mean, I think, like I said, I think there's a lot of kids going to Berkeley who think they want to be producers, or maybe they think that how to operate your computer, you know, and your plugins and stuff. And I think that's, you know, Sean's been teaching at Berkeley for a while now, and I think that's been his whole sort of MO for going there, is to make people realize that you could be a producer and not know anything about recording at all. You know, like Rick Rubin, good example. You know, he just did that interview on 60 Minutes where they said, "Do you know how to work all this stuff?" And he goes, "No, nothing. I don't do it. I don't touch it. I don't work the board. I don't know how to do anything." Which is probably not true. He probably does, but you know, but his attitude is, that's not what I do. What I do is listen to the music and decide what I think about it. And that's the biggest part of the job. So there you go.
Thanks, Paul.
Kids, don't try this at home.
Thanks, man.
Well,